You ever read something, just a simple question, and it completely flips how you see things?
Happens all the time. What sparked this?
This article by Larken Rose, it's called, "How Would You Use Violence to Make a Society Prosperous?"
Wow, okay. That definitely grabs your attention. Violence and prosperity seems like they're opposites.
Exactly, that's the immediate reaction, right?
Yeah,
It
no.
sounds wrong, contradictory.
And that's probably the point. That friction, that sort of cognitive dissonance, makes you really examine the core assumptions.
Totally. So the thought experiment he sets up is like this. Imagine you're running a society. It's already pretty good, free, thriving.
Okay, got it. A successful play.
But your job is to make it even better, more prosperous. Here's the catch, though.
There's always a catch.
The only tool you have is force, like coercion, punching, shooting, threats, that kind of thing.
So no inventing, no building alliances, no clever trading on my part, just force.
Just force. And it really forces you, pardon the pun, to think about where prosperity actually comes from. What are the engines of wealth creation?
Right, because stripping away all the usual tools isolates the effect of coercion itself. It cuts through a lot of the usual noise around, say, economic policy debates.
Yeah, so for this deep dive, that's what we want to do. Really unpack this experiment for everyone listening. See what happens when you look at prosperity through this, well, pretty extreme lens.
And do it quickly, thoroughly, without getting bogged down. Let's see what insights pop out.
Okay, so Rose starts really basic, fundamental even, voluntary exchange.
The bedrock of, well, most economies we see, people trading things freely.
Think about buying, I don't know, a coffee or selling something you made online. It only works because both people feel like they're winning, right?
Exactly. You want the coffee more than the $3. The cafe wants the $3 more than that specific cup of coffee. Both parties benefit based on their own values.
It's a win-win. And importantly, he says, this actually creates new value. It's not just shuffling stuff around.
That's crucial because preferences are met, overall satisfaction increases. New value is generated from that interaction.
Okay, simple enough. We see it every day. But now, introduce coercion. The thought experiment kicks in.
Right. So what's the first scenario?
Imagine the government steps in and says, right, everyone has to buy their widgets from Bob's Widget Corp. Or else.
Uh-oh. So threats are involved now?
Yep. Suddenly that voluntary win-win thing, it's gone.
Well, Bob's Widget Corp's probably happy, right? Sales are up.
Sure, Bob's doing great. But what about everyone else? They're being forced to buy Bob's widgets.
Meaning they might have preferred to spend their money on something else entirely. Or maybe they didn't want a widget at all.
Exactly. They're handing over money for something they value less than the money itself. Otherwise, they would have bought it voluntarily. So they're actually made poorer, in a sense.
Their overall well-being, their economic position, according to their own preferences, has gone down.
Right. So the article argues quite strongly that this isn't wealth creation for society as a whole. It's just moving money around using force. Wealth redistribution, not creation.
It makes intuitive sense. You're benefiting one party, Bob, at the direct expense of others, the consumers. The total pie hasn't grown.
Okay, what about another angle? Subsidies. The government taxes people.
Again, under threat of force if you don't pay.
Right. Collects that money and gives it to businesses to, say, produce certain goods. Maybe something the government thinks is important.
Okay, so instead of forcing purchases, they're forcing the funding of production.
Yeah. But what if people don't actually want the stuff being produced with that subsidy?
Then you've got a problem. You're using resources, labor, materials, time pulled from the population via taxes.
To make things nobody values enough to buy voluntarily. It's essentially waste, isn't it? Producing junk, as Rose puts it.
It certainly seems inefficient from a value creation perspective, and even if down the line people do end up wanting those goods.
They were still forced to pay for them up front, right? They were made poorer initially because they couldn't use that tax money for things they valued more at that moment.
The coercion still resulted in a net loss of value at the time the tax was taken. This also ties into the whole job creation argument, doesn't it?
Oh yeah, he hits that one hard. The classic example. Government paying unemployed people to do something pointless.
Like digging holes and filling them back in, or his example, carrying rocks in circles.
Exactly. Look, jobs are created, people have wages. That sounds good, right?
Well, people are employed, yes. But is society any richer? Is any actual value being produced?
Doesn't seem like it. You're using resources, the workers' time, the money taxed, to pay them on an activity that produces nothing anyone actually wants or needs.
It's activity without productive purpose. The wages are just a transfer payment funded by coercion, not payment for creating something society values through voluntary demand.
So forcing purchases doesn't work. Taxing for subsidies doesn't seem to create net wealth. Paying people for pointless tasks also doesn't work.
According to this framework, no. They all involve coercion moving resources away from where people would voluntarily direct them.
What about just plain redistribution? Taking from the rich, giving to the poor. Enforced equality. Surely that helps overall prosperity.
Okay, this is a really important distinction Rose makes. Actions like redistribution might be argued for on grounds of fairness or social safety nets, or reducing inequality. Those are separate arguments.
But purely from a wealth creation standpoint, making the whole society richer.
From that specific perspective, Rose argues it's still just moving existing wealth around. Taking from A and giving to B doesn't magically make more wealth appear. It changes who holds it.
So again, it's about slicing the existing pie, not growing it.
Precisely. He's laser-focused on net creation of prosperity for the society as a whole.
Okay, this leads to a big one. Infrastructure. Roads, bridges, stuff governments often fund with taxes. Surely that creates prosperity. We all use roads.
This is often the go-to example, yeah. How else would we get major infrastructure?
But Rose applies the same core logic. It's pretty challenging.
His argument is, if the community truly valued that bridge, let's say, more than the total cost of building it,
then people would chip in voluntarily, right? Through user fees or local fundraising or businesses seeing an opportunity. They'd see the value proposition.
That's the idea. The fact that you have to use coercion taxation to fund it
Implies what?
It implies that for at least some of the people being taxed, they valued keeping their money more than they valued having that specific bridge built at that specific cost.
So forcing them to pay makes them poorer according to their own values, even if the bridge eventually gets built and used.
Exactly. On balance, value was destroyed at the point of coercion. The bridge exists, it might provide benefits, but it came at the cost of forcing people to give up something they valued more.
Wow. So even a bridge, if funded by force, isn't seen as pure wealth creation in this model. It's a value transfer, potentially with overall value destruction depending on how much people resisted paying.
It's definitely a counterintuitive take on something we usually see as an unambiguous public good. It forces you to weigh the benefits against the cost of the coercion itself.
And he uses tariffs, protectionism,
Yeah.
in a similar way, right? Protecting local industries by restricting imports.
Yes, that's another form of, let's call it economic coercion or violence. You're forcefully preventing consumers from making voluntary exchanges with foreign sellers.
To benefit who?
To benefit the protected domestic industry. But who pays the price?
The consumers, usually. Higher prices, less choice.
Exactly. So again, it benefits one group through force, but at the expense of the broader society, reducing overall economic well-being and value. It hinders mutually beneficial trade.
Okay, so after looking at forced buying, subsidies, make-work jobs, redistribution, infrastructure, tariffs. That's the big takeaway, the central conclusion.
It keeps coming back to the same core point. Coercion shuffles wealth. It redirects resources. It benefits some at the expense of others, but it doesn't create net wealth for society.
So prosperity doesn't come from force.
Not according to Rose. Real, sustainable prosperity, he argues, only arises from voluntary cooperation, from people freely choosing to trade, to innovate, to produce things others value, mutual benefit.
Which brings us back to that initial, really stark question he poses directly to the reader, to us listening right now.
The challenge, yeah.
Describe any way that threatening or shooting people can make society as a whole richer.
And when you frame it that starkly, using the thought experiment's constraint of only having violence as a tool, it's really, really hard to come up with an answer, isn't it?
Yeah, it seems almost impossible. How do you get innovation or cooperation or efficient production using only threats?
It seems fundamentally counterproductive to the very things that generate wealth.
So if coercion can't create prosperity, what can government do, in his view, to help make society richer?
This is where his answer is quite stark and maybe a bit radical for mainstream politics.
Which is?
Basically, stay out of the way.
Just get out of the way.
Yeah. Allow individuals the maximum freedom to engage in those voluntary, mutually beneficial exchanges and activities that do create wealth. Don't interfere with coercion.
He does add a cynical little note about why you don't hear that much on the campaign trail.
Right, because the very nature of government, as it's typically conceived, relies on having and using that power of coercion. It's hard to campaign on, I promise to do less forceful stuff.
Okay, so let's wrap this up. What's the core lesson for someone listening to this deep dive?
I think there are a few layers. First, it's a powerful lesson in sort of Econ 101 logic, the fundamental difference between voluntary exchange creating value versus coercion just transferring it.
Okay, economics. What else?
There's a moral philosophy angle too,
Yeah.
right? It makes you think about the ethics of using force, even for supposedly good economic ends.
And maybe some political skepticism.
Definitely. It encourages you to question claims that government policies based on taxation and regulation automatically lead to greater overall prosperity. To ask, where's the coercion and what's its actual effect on value?
But the main unavoidable takeaway seems to be,
Prosperity can't be forced. Wealth isn't built by threatening people. It's built by freeing them to cooperate and create voluntarily.
it really hammers home that distinction between wealth creation and wealth redistribution via force.
Yeah.
And that challenge just hangs there. Find a way violence makes us all richer. It's tough.
It is. And it leaves you with a final thought to chew on, maybe.
Go on.
If prosperity genuinely springs from voluntary action, from free exchange and cooperation, what does that imply about how we should approach societal improvement?
Does it mean we should rely less on top-down coercive solutions?
Maybe. It certainly pushes you to think more about enabling voluntary solutions, fostering environments where people want to cooperate and trade because they see the mutual benefit, rather than assuming force is the primary or only effective tool for progress.
Definitely food for thought. And if you want to read the original piece that sparked this, Larken Rose's article, How Would You Use Violence to Make a Society Prosperous?, is linked in our notes. It's worth a read.
Absolutely. It packs a punch.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.